Tonight on Bridge City News, troops are heading to the East Coast to help Newfoundlanders dig out from one of the worst winter storms for that region on record. Findings were released today regarding the social issues surrounding the Lethbridge supervised consumption site. And family members of those who died when a Ukrainian passenger jet was shot down are still demanding answers.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Good evening. Thanks so much for joining us. Many on the East Coast are still trying to dig out of one of the worst storms on record. Canadian troops are on their way to Newfoundland and Labrador to help the province deal with the snowstorm that hit the area pretty hard. Federal ministers say up to 300 troops will stay for as long as they're needed.
When it became apparent the impact that this particular weather event was going to have on that province and in those communities, we were out very quickly, and there has been very close collaboration and cooperation between ourselves and the Premier's office. We just got off the phone a few minutes ago with Premier Ball, and we're making sure that there is good close coordination to make sure that we give them and get the resources that they need and that they require.
What we've done so far is moved in very quickly a Cormorant helicopters with search and rescue personnel actually yesterday to making sure that we have additional support when it comes to supporting patients in hospitals or however they could actually assist. We had a recce party that left very quickly, and what you'll see is probably by the end of today, you'll have about 150 to 200 personnel on the ground ready to provide support. This could surge up to anywhere between 250 to 300 by tomorrow and the coming days.
Families and friends of those who died after a Ukrainian passenger plane was shot down are demanding a full investigation into why it happened. Speaking at a memorial ceremony in Montreal recently, they say they will not get any closure until they know exactly why Flight 752 was brought down. All 176 on board, including 57 Canadians, died when the aircraft was shot down January 8th by an Iranian surface-to-air missile.
It's a mix of feelings. It's a mix of like shock. It's a mix of sorrow, sadness, and anger and rage. So we are dealing with all these feelings now, and we are full of questions. We lost beloved ones, and also a lot of people lost their beloved ones, friends. This is a tragedy. This is not accepted so far for us. We are in denial phase, I believe, and what we're looking now is to find who was responsible for this. So we cannot bring them back, but what we would ask today on behalf of our family is to justice, is to know what has happened before the tragedy, who is responsible for that.
Foreign Affairs Minister Francois-Philippe Champagne wrote to his Iranian counterpart to stress that the black boxes from the down flight may be analyzed by experts in Ukraine and France. His pressure comes amid signals that Iran will not share the flight data recorders.
Iran has a path to choose. Either they go to the path of transparency, accountability, and taking full responsibility. When you say to the world you take full responsibility, that comes with consequences. What I did say to the Iranian foreign minister is that the wish of Canada, the wish of the coordination group would be that the black box be sent quickly, either to Ukraine or to France. I've been made aware of the news report that you just mentioned, and I wrote this morning to my Iranian counterpart to stress again the wish of Canada, the wish of the coordination group, and I would think the wish of the international community that the black box be sent to where they should be sent.
Lethbridge police need help finding a suspect who robbed a Northside convenience store early yesterday. Police say the incident occurred around 12:48 a.m. at the 7-Eleven located at 2607 Scenic Drive North. The suspect told the clerk that he had a gun and demanded cash. He got his money and ran. No gun was seen, and fortunately no one was injured. The perpetrator is described as 6 feet tall with an average build. He wore a black jacket, black toque, sunglasses, and black gloves. He was also wearing gray pants and his face was covered. A silver car was seen circling the store prior to the robbery. If you have any information that can help, please call Crime Stoppers at 1-800-222-8477. A 31-year-old Lethbridge man is facing multiple charges after police tried to arrest him on Thursday when he allegedly stole a truck at a Southside convenience store. The suspect refused to stop and police discontinued the chase because of public safety concerns. The following day, police investigated reports of 3 hit and runs involving the same truck. Officers located the vehicle in Coaldale, only to discover that the man had driven off with another truck. Police located and arrested Daniel McFadden inside of the Lethbridge supervised consumption site. The province of Alberta has established a working group to combat the growing public safety threat posed by liquor store robberies. Justice Minister Doug Schweitzer says in Edmonton alone, there were 9,500 liquor store robberies and thefts last year. That worked out to an average of 26 a day, or 3 times the average from 2018. In addition to costing retailers millions in financial losses, Schweitzer says it also places a strain on police resources and a continued risk of violence toward workers and bystanders. Schweitzer says there's evidence that criminal gangs are fueling the dramatic increase in liquor store thefts. The social issue relating to our city's supervised consumption site were studied, and the findings were released today at Lethbridge City Council. The Heart of the City Committee spearheaded the research undertaken by the U of L in order to help assess the potential impact to our community of the SCS.
Well, I think it shares a few things, confirms a few things that we knew, and that this is a very complex issue with many moving parts, and that it's just another piece of information for us to take and to make some important decisions on. For us, it confirms and gives us the ability to look at what the area was dealing with before a consumption site was added to the area. Some of the things that happened as that consumption site ramped up in terms of its activity, and then a year from the date of opening, where we were at from a community perspective. And so now what that allows us to do is have a baseline so that as we institute new mitigation methods and techniques from the Clean Sweep program, diversion outreach team, and some of the other things funded from the Downtown Clean and Safe strategy, we're able to see whether or not they're impacting in a positive manner the environment around the consumption site.
In the 100-meter zone around the site, there's a concentration of people who are coming for services, because prior to that, this area was a commercial area. There's some bars in the area, so any activity that we see will be at night related to alcohol. And so with the site, we have a group of disenfranchised people with rather complex needs coming to the area for service. And the services, the wraparound services include they come there for housing help, they come for social services, health care, and also substance use that is safe so that they don't overdose and die. And so it's that's why people come to that area now. And so that area was relatively untouched before by this particular population. And so I can understand why people are noticing things. But again, the study does not talk about the merits of supervised consumption, such as wraparound services, but it does talk about, the study does address that there may be some unintended consequences from a large group of people now accessing a single service.
The study was commissioned by City Council as part of the Joint Action Team funding initiative. The state of our city's digital infrastructure, along with the availability of broadband internet service for business owners, was also discussed at Lethbridge City Hall today. The Lethbridge Chamber of Commerce released their findings of the Broadband Task Force.
If we started out with meeting or exceeding, which would be great, the CRTC minimum standard. Right now, the feedback that we got from our 64 respondents was that 54% of them weren't even meeting the minimum standard, the international standard that is required. The only way we're going to put business forward and be competitive to what the rest of the world is if we can meet the world standard and the international standard. We are at a disadvantage if we can't use some of those new technologies that are out there to advance us in our business and in connecting with outside of our city.
Canadian universities used to have a reputation for leading the way when it came to free speech and freedom to debate controversial ideas. But that reputation has been fading, according to John Carpe, the president of the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms.
We have reason to believe that the university is scared of Antifa violence, and so they want to pander to Antifa and please Antifa, which is very, very problematic, because if you don't stand up to these groups and if you allow them to dictate who can and cannot speak, you've completely lost the free society. And universities, of all places, should be upholding free speech rights.
We will hear more about the UBC situation with John Carpe, the president for the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms, coming up in the second half of our show. Newly published papers from the scientists at the University of Waterloo are questioning previous studies that said Wood Buffalo National Park in Alberta is being damaged by BC Hydro's Bennett Dam and upstream oil sands mines. Instead, they say that 150 years worth of sediment cores suggests drying in the delta is more likely caused by a river breaking its banks and redirecting water. Aquatic ecologist Roland Hall says the same cores reveal no increase in 6 heavy metals commonly linked to the oil sands. Indigenous people in the region say Hall may be going too far with limited data. Police in Kansas City, Missouri say 2 people were killed and 15 others were wounded following a shooting outside of a bar over the weekend.
At about 11:30 tonight, officers were actually in the area, 40 Highway and Nolan Road, when a disturbance started and there was a shooting. Upon arrival, they found quite a chaotic scene and they had to call in officers from all over the metro area in order to stabilize the scene before they could start the investigation. Once they began the investigation, they found 1 adult male deceased in the parking lot, 1 adult female deceased in the parking lot. We believe that the shooter that started this incident is one of the deceased. And the preliminary investigation looks as though an armed security guard working at the establishment stopped the shooter.
There was also shooting at a club in San Antonio, Texas. Police say a manhunt got underway Sunday night after 2 people were killed and 5 others were injured following the shooting spree.
About 8 o'clock or so, we got a call for shots fired in the club. There was some type of concert going on in there. There was an altercation between a group or individuals. One person at least pulled out a gun, started shooting. Don't know if it was at a specific individual or just shooting indiscriminately. 7 people were shot, 2 dead, 5 at local hospitals.
A new study says your kitty cat may be suffering in silence. The study done by the University of Calgary says cats are hard to diagnose when they're in pain. The research suggests we have to keep a close eye on the feline facial expression, including ears, eyes, and even their whiskers.
We were really interested in seeing if we could assess pain in cats, especially if we could assess it quickly in a really user-friendly way. Well, we found a way that seems to work pretty well, where we're looking at their facial features. So we're looking at their ears, their eyes, their whiskers, their muzzle, and the position of their head. So we're kind of combining those 5 things together, and in combination, it gives us a pretty good idea if cats are painful or not. With the ears specifically as an example, we're looking to see if their ears are going from a nice forward position when a cat is comfortable and happy. As they become more painful, the ears start to rotate backwards towards their tail, and they start to flatten off as well. Or with their eyes, for example, instead of having nice open rounded eyes, they start to squint, and eventually their eyes will close altogether. As veterinarians, we find it hard to identify pain in cats, and because of that, it's hard to make a decision or make the right decision sometimes as to when we should be giving pain relief, and tied to that, whether the pain relief we've given is actually working or not.
The Toronto Blue Jays unveiled their new 3rd jerseys this weekend at Winterfest at Rogers Centre. Vladimir Guerrero Jr., Bo Bichette, Kevin Biggio, and Randall Grichuk modeled their retro-looking baby blue uniforms for the fans.
I mean, just look at them. I mean, they pop. I mean, they definitely give a different feel to the Blue Jays, and I think it brings back a lot of history. There was a lot of good that happened in this color of jerseys, and it's good to bring it back.
Yeah, I think it's a good mix of what the Blue Jays were when they used to wear the baby blues, and now we're putting our own spin on it just for almost like a new era of baseball here in Toronto.
Why do you like this particular look?
Because I like the way my teammates look.
A snow maze measuring 2,789 square meters and located around 30 kilometers south of Winnipeg has achieved a Guinness World Record. The winter maze is bringing locals and travelers from around the world to the field of St. Adolphe. Many locals feel the record-breaking snow maze is a unique way of capturing winter's whimsical charm. That is one amazing-looking maze. A lot of our snow has melted thanks to the Chinook, which has made its way to southwestern Alberta. The warmer temperatures should be with us for the most of the week. Complete weather details are coming up. The Chinook has arrived for our region and the meltdown has begun. Make sure you have lots of the windshield washer fluid. Jeanette Roche is here with a complete look at the weather picture. And Jeanette, it appears as though the warmer temps will be sticking around.
Yeah, Hal, well, they should be sticking around at least for the next little while. Look at the high that we got to today, 9 degrees. Overnight low, 1 degree, which is wonderful. We don't have to plug in those cars anymore, hooray. High of 6 tomorrow and a low of 0 overnight the following night. Lots of sunshine coming up for us in the 5-day forecast as well, with highs of 3 degrees on Wednesday. And then look at that, we're rising up into the double-digit temperatures for Thursday, high of 10 degrees, high of 12 expected on Friday. And then into a lovely weekend, high Saturday, 7 degrees, and 4 degrees is expected as a high on Sunday, with a lot of mix in sun and cloud and tons of sunshine coming up for the rest of the week. Okay, highs and lows for this time of year. -1 is the average high, -14 is the average low. Of course, we're getting a lot higher than that right now. The highest temperature on this day was in 1981. It was 16 degrees, and the lowest temperature recorded was -43. That was back in 1954. The sun rose this morning at 8:19 a.m., and it just set at 5:06 p.m. So, looking ahead to our national forecast, looking to tomorrow, Victoria and Vancouver should be seeing some showers. High of 9 degrees in Victoria, high of 8 in Vancouver. -2 is expected for Edmonton and +2 expected in Calgary. Lots of sunshine expected around Alberta and into the rest of the prairies. Saskatoon's high tomorrow, -3, -2 expected in Regina, and -6 over in Winnipeg. Mix of sun and cloud expected all across Manitoba and Saskatchewan tomorrow. Looking over to our friends in the east, Toronto should be seeing some flurry activity with a high of -2. -8 is expected in Ottawa and -9 in Montreal. Ottawa should be seeing some flurries as well. Mix of sun and cloud across that whole region as well. Atlantic Canada is going to be seeing some sunshine, which is quite a bit different than what they've had the past few days. Fredericton's high, -11, -9 expected in Halifax, -13 in Charlottetown, and St. John's, Newfoundland, still no longer necessarily in a state of emergency, but as they're coming out of that blizzard condition, -5 is the high tomorrow with a 60% chance of flurries. That is your national forecast.
The International Monetary Fund says low interest rates and reduced trade tensions will likely support the global economy over the next couple of years. The IMF is forecasting world economic growth will accelerate from 2.9 to 3.3% this year and by 3.4% in 2021. Economic growth in Canada is forecast to be 1.8% this year and next. The IMF says the U.S.-China interim trade deal and central bank's low-rate policies are giving the global economy its biggest boost. The deficit in Canada is just over $28 billion and is expected to rise this year. Aaron Woodrick is the federal director for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, and he says federal spending today not only impacts Canadians now, but our kids and our grandkids in the future.
Yeah, realistically, it means higher taxes because they're going to need the money to pay for things, and it's going to mean a squeeze on the services that they expect. They're going to pay taxes, and instead of going to schools and hospitals and roads, it's going to be going to pay for interest on money that was borrowed 10 or 20 years ago. And I think that's just wrong. It's essentially a form of intergenerational theft. And that's the reason that we believe that governments need to live within their means today so that we're not punishing our children and grandchildren.
Catch the full interview with Aaron Woodrick and BCN's Paul Arthur discussing our country's finances. That's coming up after business news. An official with the British High Commission offered an update in Calgary earlier today discussing the implications of Brexit on Canada. Experts have said there will be uncertainty for Canadian businesses in a post-Brexit UK involving billions of dollars of trade and investment. Britain represents one of Canada's top 5 destinations for investments and top 10 markets for both goods and services. Demonstrators in Berlin, Germany are calling for more environment-friendly agriculture practices at a weekend protest that included farmers with more than 150 tractors. Organizers said this year that could make or break the transition to sustainable, climate-friendly farming. Germany has recently seen protests by farmers complaining that planned new environmental limits are overly restrictive. Last November, around 10,000 farmers with 5,000 tractors snarled traffic in Berlin. And last month, Dutch farmers protested against government moves to cut pollution they say would hurt their businesses. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 38 points on the day to 17,597. The Dow was up 50 points to 29,348. The S&P 500 was up 12 points to 3329. The Nasdaq was up almost 32 points to 9388. Oil was up 12 cents on the day to 58.66 per barrel. Natural gas was down 6 cents to $1.94. Gold was down 2 cents to 15.6075 per ounce, and silver was down a penny at 18.07 per ounce. Wheat is at $232 per metric ton, barley's at $237, canola's at $477, and corn is at $282 per metric ton. Live cattle were up 23 cents to $126.43. Feeder cattle were down 8 cents to $145.75. Lean hogs were up 80 cents to $67.80. And the Canadian dollar was unchanged on the day at 76.64 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, many on the East Coast are still trying to dig their way out of one of the worst storms on record. Canadian troops are on their way to Newfoundland and Labrador to help the province deal with a snowstorm that hit the area very hard. Federal ministers say up to 300 troops will stay for as long as they're needed. The large deficit and debt in Canada will not only impact you and I, but our kids and grandkids as well. Aaron Woodrick, Federal Director for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, has details with BCN's Paul Arthur next. But first, here's a look what's happening in and around your community.
Here's your Bridge City News Community Calendar. Ready to take the plunge? Southern Albertans are invited to take part in this year's Polar Plunge in support of Special Olympics, taking place Saturday, February 1st at Henderson Lake Park from 10 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. Every dollar raised goes towards more than 3,300 Special Olympic athletes representing 140 communities across Alberta. Registration is $50 and comes with a pair of Polar Plunge gloves. For more details and to register, visit specialolympics.ca/Alberta Polar Plunge. Night to Shine is an event sponsored by the Tim Tebow Foundation and hosted by My Victory Lethbridge on Friday, February 7th. Night to Shine is an unforgettable prom night experience for people with special needs ages 14 and older. This complimentary event begins on a red carpet with guests receiving the royal treatment, including hair and makeup stations, limousine rides, a catered dinner, and much more. For details and to register, visit myvictory.ca. And if you'd like to volunteer, email carol@myvictory.ca. Do you have a passion for writing? The River Bottom Writers invite you to join them the second and fourth Thursday of every month at 6:45 p.m. in the Richardson Oilseed Room at Lethbridge College for a session of informal writing practice. Writers of all genres are welcome. Bring your pen, paper, or laptop. And that's your Bridge City News Community Calendar.
Two things in life, they say, are certain: death and taxes. Well, today we're going to focus on just one of these fun subjects, taxes. Our guest is Aaron Woodrick. He's the Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. You can find them at taxpayer.com. Aaron, welcome to BCN. Can you, off the top, just share with our viewers a little bit about what your organization is all about?
Sure, Paul. The Canadian Taxpayers Federation is a nonprofit organization, and we're dedicated to three things: lower taxes, less waste, and accountable government. We don't take any money from government, and we rely entirely on voluntary donations to do our work.
What? You don't get any tax benefits coming your way from the government? Okay. Well, one of the issues you're continuing to pressure the government on is the federal carbon tax. Now, proponents argue that it is a necessary tax and that it will, in fact, improve the environment. So what do you say to that?
Well, the challenge with a carbon tax is that, of course, to work at all, it has to be very high. It has to be very, very painful, because the whole theory behind it is the higher the price, the less you can afford of something. So the obvious example is gas. A lot of people need gas just to go about their daily lives. And you can probably imagine what it would be like for a lot of families to see the price of gas double or triple. And that's the kind of carbon tax we're talking about if we really want to force people to change how they behave.
Right. Well, is it actually causing individuals to change their behavior? It doesn't seem like it. Maybe it is changing behavior amongst big corporation, heavy emitters, and so forth. Is it?
Well, look, by and large, for the people whose behavior it will change, it's people who can do it very easily. If you live in a big city and you can switch to a bus, a lot of folks live in rural areas. They don't really have any other option but to drive from A to B. And so, what I think we have with the carbon tax in this country is kind of the worst of both worlds. People, it's high enough to annoy people. They see that gas is more expensive, but it's not so high that people, are going to stop driving or anything like that.
Right. So, I mean, it's obviously a political problem to raise it, 5 times the amount it is right now. That's not going to go over very well. So you're basically saying we're going to be stuck with this, looks like, an annoyance. But, or is it, you think at some point actually going to get that high that it will cause behavior, or no?
Well, I certainly hope it won't. I mean, it would be devastating for a lot of families to have a tax go that high. So I don't think it will go that high. Whether it actually sticks around is an open question. This has been challenged in court multiple times. The Alberta Court of Appeal is hearing it. It's going to go to the Supreme Court this year. So this tax may or may not be around in a year's time, and we would certainly like to see the end of it.
Okay. Well, there's also the argument that, hey, this isn't such a big tax because a lot of people, after all, are getting a carbon tax rebate. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, it's true that there's a rebate, and that's better than not getting one. But the government seems to be claiming that everyone's going to be better off. And it's basic math. You can't take a pool of money and turn around and give it back out in a way that everyone has more money. Somebody is paying the freight here, and it's unfortunately going to be people who are usually not in a position to do things like cut back on driving.
Okay. Well, there were some positive changes in the tax department. The federal basic personal amount, that is gone up, correct?
That's right. So the first, $12,000 you earn in income, you don't pay any tax on. That number is slowly increasing to $15,000 a year that you won't pay tax on over the next few years. So that is one positive step this government has taken, and we've applauded that. I think it's a recognition that they realize that a lot of Canadians are having trouble making ends meet, and the government should do something relatively simple, which is leave more money in their pockets so they can decide how they can best spend that money on their families.
Right. And for those in the higher income brackets, I understand they won't see the same increase in that basic personal amount, right?
That's right. It phases out around the $210,000 mark. So anybody earning over that will not see an additional benefit, but they will have the benefit, the current benefit still.
Right. So, okay. I think we can be okay with that for now. Looking at my paycheck, no, I'm not there yet. So, okay. This year's going to bring in an increase in the amount of CPP contributions, so toward the pension plan. Is it anything significant?
No, it's significant for some people, but it's not as much to offset the increase in the basic personal amount. It could be about $40 to $50 for an individual. So it's a slight increase. The real challenge is it's going up every year. This is the second year of a 5-year increase. So it does start to add up to substantial money after the 5 years are phased in.
Yeah, do you think that's going to continue going up that way, or?
Well, they made a one-time adjustment. So as far as the plan right now, the Trudeau government, they have a 5-year plan to increase it. This is the second year of the 5-year, but there's no plan beyond that.
Okay. And on the flip side of that, we are going to see a decrease in the amount we pay for employment insurance premiums, right?
That's right. It's not that much again, but about $20 a year in savings. So you can see with the various increases and decreases, really there's not a lot of big changes for most Canadians at the federal level this year. You'll be within $100 better or worse off than most years.
And with EI premiums, are they is that all going toward employment insurance? I know in the past there was an issue with some of that going into the general fund and being used for other things. Is that still happening?
No, I mean, the government still has the capacity to do that, but given the controversy in the past, the government has been a lot more careful, and frankly, groups like ours are watching to make sure that they don't do that, which I think tamps down the temptation for them to do it.
Okay. And now let's talk a bit about the federal government's plan to continue the ongoing pattern of deficit spending. Is that necessary? Some say it is. Is it helpful?
Yeah, we really don't believe it is. And in fact, this government was running deficits at a time when the economy was growing. Most of the arguments in favor of deficit financing is when the economy is slow, you spend to boost the economy, and then you cut back a bit in the good times. It's a counter-cyclical spending, they call it. This government has not done that. They ran up the tab when the economy was doing relatively well in most parts of the country, and yet now they are now saying they're going to spend if there is a recession. So you can't spend in the good times and the bad times. The math doesn't add up. And that's frankly our number one concern right now is this government is piling up debt at a rate that is really going to saddle our children and grandchildren with a big bill to pay.
Yeah, I mean, you can't spend your way out of a recession, I don't think. I mean, not that we're in a recession, but yeah, I mean, just, yeah, like you say, do the math, right? And now, it's certainly not a vote getter, but, should there be a plan in place to reduce spending, right? I mean, uh, I look at my household budget, and if we're in the red, we have to make some cutbacks somewhere. Maybe we start buying used clothes instead of going to a brand new store to buy our clothes or whatever it might be. You got to pick and choose where can we cut back, and yes, it might hurt some, but it's necessary, right? So, your thoughts on that?
Well, absolutely. This government has shown no ability to keep spending under control. And frankly, the worse it becomes now. For the people who don't like cuts in the future, you should balance your budget today. The more you spend now, the more painful it makes the longer you put it off. And this government, the most obvious example is spending on government employees. They have not kept a lid on the spending. Simply keeping a lid on that increase, you could actually start to eliminate the deficit fairly simply just by holding the line on spending. We're not even getting into cuts yet. That's not to say there are plenty of things this government is spending money on that they maybe should spend less on or not be involved in at all. But simply just holding the line would go a long way to eventually eliminating the deficit.
Of course, then you get the pushback from the various unions and so forth, right? So you got to deal with that, and of course they do tend to vote a certain way. So, yeah. Well, I guess that's the pressure on the government, right? How do we handle this, right? I mean, you want to get reelected and so forth, but at the same time, they look at this going, okay, we got to cut somewhere. And again, when you see the studies that are done on, public benefits and so forth, the wages compared to those in the regular Joe sector, right? The rest of us working out here not for the government. There is, I think, about a 10% difference in the wages and the benefits and so forth.
Absolutely. So the people paying the freight, who are the people who don't work for government, government workers are making 10% more. They get very, very generous pensions. They have great job security. So I don't think it's reasonable for them to be demanding more when folks, especially in parts of the country like Alberta, are struggling just to keep jobs. So we would like to see the government take a tougher line with the government unions. The reality is, in any negotiation, it's supposed to be the union on one side and management on the other. But in government, you often have, it's almost as if the union has 1.5 people on their side, and that is why groups like ours, we try and be a counterweight there and make clear that there might be several 100,000 government employees in Ottawa, but there are 36 million Canadians across the country that need their interests looked after as well.
Oh, for sure. Are there any other specific areas you'd like to see the feds cut back on spending?
Yeah, we'd like to see them really get rid of what we call corporate welfare. We are for free enterprise, but we believe that businesses have to rise or fall on their own merits. And when you have government bailing out companies that should be going out of business, you're really setting a really bad example. And I've seen it in my few years here at the taxpayers. More and more businesses seem to think they can squeeze free money out of Ottawa, and I think that's a really bad business culture that you don't want to be encouraging.
Yeah, you don't want to see that many bailouts, right, from struggling companies. Why are they struggling? Maybe they need to change their business plan and so forth, like the rest of us would have to do, right? So any thoughts on like closing certain tax loopholes, that sort of thing? I know there's some companies that, they'll go to different countries, sort of thing, find some tax havens and so forth.
Yeah, look, that is a concern. Overall, the tax code is just simply too complicated. My basic advice to the government would be simpler is better. We should all agree on what the amount of tax, what the revenue they want is, and get that money in the simplest way possible. When you have a very complicated tax code, you're inviting people to game the system, and guess what? It turns out to be the super wealthy that have the ability to do that. So if you want to keep the money in Canada, you want people to have predictability and avoid this kind of gaming the system, you want a simple, clean tax system that's easy for everyone to understand.
All right. Do we have any estimates of how long it might take to get back to balanced budgets, and also how long it would take to actually erase our national debt?
I think an aggressive government could erase the federal deficit just in a few years. As I said, it doesn't even necessarily mean big cuts. It just means keeping a lid on. No more increases. That would go a long way. In terms of debt, that's a much bigger hill to climb. The federal debt's $700 billion. That we spend $25 billion a year on interest alone. And now a lot of people will say, well, that's all a lot of money to me. That's more money than we spend on the Canadian Armed Forces. So just on interest payments is more than we spend on the military. So it just goes to show show you the price of borrowing that money. That's with low interest rates. Imagine if they go up. So, we really think the government, step one, balance the budget. Step two, put forward a realistic plan, over a longer time horizon to get that debt under control and eventually erased.
And practically speaking, how does continued debt affect our children and grandchildren? I mean, their daily lives. What's that going to look like in 10 years and 30 years?
Yeah, realistically, it means higher taxes because they're going to need the money to pay for things, and it's going to mean a squeeze on the services that they expect. They're going to pay taxes, and instead of going to schools and hospitals and roads, it's going to be going to pay for interest on money that was borrowed 10 or 20 years ago. And I think that's just wrong. It's essentially a form of intergenerational theft, and that's the reason that we believe that governments need to live within their means today, so that we're not punishing our children and grandchildren.
Yeah, it's actually a good term to use there, intergenerational theft, yeah. Now, what about municipal taxes? An interesting animal there. It seems that in so many cities, these tax hikes we're seeing are actually outpacing the rate of inflation by a fair bit, actually. So, I mean, you do the math, logically speaking, how is that sustainable?
Yeah, it isn't. And I mean, this is another layer. When we get into a debate about taxes, we have a saying, everybody knows it, that there's only one taxpayer. And from the taxpayer standpoint, it doesn't really matter if you're paying tax to the provincial government, federal government, municipal, sales tax. It's all money that you can't use for other things. And so we're concerned because it is a trend across the country. A lot of cities are starting to really jack up things like property taxes, and that is really starting to bite a lot of Canadians.
Yeah, something needs to change for sure. Your report also talks about something called bracket creep. It is kind of creepy. Can you explain this?
Yeah, so what bracket creep is most governments in the country, they index the income brackets to inflation. So, because the price of everything goes up every year, they increase the income tax brackets to match that so that you're not punished and pushed into a higher bracket just through inflation. But bracket creep is when they don't index to inflation. And unfortunately, there's several provinces, Alberta is one of them, which in fact, they just brought in the de-indexation. It used to be indexed to inflation and they've taken it away. So it's a sneaky way of squeezing people for a little bit more tax. And it's something we really discourage governments from doing.
Yeah, again, that just starts to creep up on you, right? And over time, it'll ding you. All right. Can you tell us just a little bit about the taxes we pay for gasoline? We touched on it earlier. Apparently 34% of what we pay for gas is tax. Is that accurate?
That's right, and that's before the carbon tax. And even worse than that is there's tax on tax. So most of the time, with the sales tax, for places that most of the country pays the sales tax, you pay that on the price of the product you're buying. But with gasoline, they add in the excise taxes on the gas, and then you pay the tax on the combined amount. So you're actually paying tax on tax, which we think is completely inappropriate. It actually costs Canadians almost $2 billion a year. It is a significant amount of money. And it's just not transparent. The only protection most people have against a tax hike is that the public gets angry, so politicians won't do it. When they do it this way, and it's very sneaky, you're really just getting soaked and you don't have much recourse.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably enjoy watching politicians trying to defend that one. Pretty difficult to do, right? You also mentioned lower gas taxes would be great, and also making sure that the government spends that on roads, building roads and maintaining them, right? I mean, that's a big part of it too, for sure. Very briefly, any final thoughts, Aaron, on what you'd like to see our various governments do to keep taxes down, to reduce them, and if there's anything we as the public should be doing to keep our governments accountable in this?
Yeah, I mean, the most important thing, I think, is that we need to encourage governments to keep a lid on spending. We need to encourage them to push back when big government unions are asking for more without considering whether there's any money left to spend. And for all Canadians, I can tell you, working for an organization like the CTF, it matters. If you call your member of parliament, if you send emails, they notice, especially when you do it in big numbers. So that's the way to go.
All right. Thanks so much for your passion on this, Aaron. Appreciate it.
Thanks a lot.
The battle for free speech and freedom of religion continues, and it's not likely to go away anytime soon. Joining me now to talk about it, look at some of the interesting cases, is John Carpe, president of the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms, joining me once again via Skype from Calgary. John, the University of BC Free Speech Club had scheduled a journalist to speak at an event called Understanding Antifa Violence, but UBC has decided to cancel the event. Why is that?
Well, Antifa is a violent left-wing activist group that will engage in vandalism and actually physically assaulted a journalist by the name of Andy Ngo. These people wear black face masks to hide their identity, and they beat up whomever they accuse of being a racist. In their sole view, and they call just about everybody a racist. But Andy Ngo was invited to speak at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver for January 29th on the topic of Antifa violence, which he himself was a victim of in Portland, Oregon, back in June of 2019. And the university gave green light, and then suddenly, just a few days before Christmas, canceled the event and said, no, we're not going to have Andy Ngo talking about Antifa violence because of safety and security. And they have not elaborated, but we have reason to believe that the university is scared of Antifa violence, and so they want to pander to Antifa and please Antifa, which is very, very problematic, because if you don't stand up to these groups and if you allow them to dictate who can and cannot speak, you've completely lost the free society. And universities, of all places, should be upholding free speech rights.
So what legal options does the Free Speech Club actually have at this point?
Well, the Justice Center is representing the Free Speech Club, and we are in the process of getting instructions to commence court proceedings against the university, because thus far it appears the university is not changing its mind to cancel the event. And the club has spent, thousands of dollars to advertise and promote the event and to pay for the airfare to get their speaker up to Vancouver, et cetera, et cetera. So we're looking at probably filing some court papers in the days ahead and suing the university and seeking an injunction, seeking a declaration that the university is required to uphold this contract.
John, there was a free speech victory in your case against the University of Alberta. Tell me more about that.
The University of Alberta was reprimanded by the Alberta Court of Appeal in regards to a security fee, $17,500 security fee, which the University of Alberta had imposed on a small campus pro-life club back in 2016. And the story behind it was that in 2015, the campus pro-life club obtained the permission of the university to put up a stationary educational display on campus for 2 days. And there are a bunch of social justice warriors who did not take kindly to this, and they very publicly plotted on Facebook and social media that they were going to interrupt the event and obstruct it, blockade it with sheets and towels and banners, and shut down the event, and make sure that there was no intellectual discussion or debate on campus. And the campus security told these obstructors, blockaders, that they were violating the code of student behavior, which they were, and yet did absolutely nothing to discipline these students, and just stood by and watched while the pro-lifers event basically got trampled into the ground, got shut down. The next year, the students said, in 2016, they went back to the university and said, we want another campus event to have a 2-day educational display. And the university said, sure, just pay us $17,500 and you can go right ahead. The university has never explained why it should be the pro-life students who merely want to exercise their legal right to express their opinions on campus in a peaceful fashion, why they should have to pay any money versus the people that are publicly bragging on Facebook about shutting down the event. Why don't they have to pay? In any event, the pro-life club took the university to court, lost at trial, but then just recently, January the 6th, the Alberta Court of Appeal issued a unanimous ruling to reprimand the University of Alberta about this $17,500 security fee.
So in other words, it's being reimbursed.
Well, it was never paid. And the sad effect was the students have not had an event in the past 4 years because, a group of students, even a group of adults would have a hard time coming up with $17,500. But if you're, if you're 20 years old and you're a university student, where do you come into that kind of money? So the club has not had they've been able to do some things, handing out flyers and pamphlets and stuff, but they haven't been able to hold an event on campus in the past 4 years because of this security fee, which they were not able to pay.
So, John, the idea of demanding the innocent side pay for security costs is happening at many universities. Is there some way to prevent this from ever happening again?
The best solution would be for for each provincial government in each province to simply make a change to the law and tell these universities that they're not allowed to punish innocent people with security fees and use security fees as a censorship tool, and that if they're going to issue invoices for security, it should be levied against the troublemakers that are actually causing the problem, whether it's violent groups like Antifa or whether it's nonviolent obstruction, which is also a very bad thing for killing off free speech. But it should be the people that are causing the problem that should have to pay the security fees. And where the universities up until now get it completely wrong is that, whether it's a presentation against Antifa or it's a pro-life club or men's issues awareness, anything controversial, they punish the people that want to speak out an unpopular message by saying, well, you can't host an event on campus unless you pay a huge sum of money.
Is there a good reason that the University of Alberta Security decided not to charge any of the students for disrupting the pro-life event?
It was just a disgrace, and the university is talking out of both sides of its mouth, because on the one hand, the university says that the behavior of these blockaders and obstructors who shut down the pro-life event, somehow their behavior does not warrant any disciplinary measures, which is kind of like saying, their behavior really wasn't all that bad. It's nothing to worry about, nothing to get excited about. At the same time, the university says, oh, but the threat to safety and security is so grave and so elevated that the Pro-Life Club has to pay $17,500. Well, that's a total contradiction. I mean, either the behavior of these blockaders was, was bad or was not bad, but the university wants to have it both ways.
Transgender activist Jessica Yaniv is in the news again, John. For our viewers not familiar with this person and the numerous human rights complaints filed, can you share a little bit of backstory and the latest complaint filed?
Yeah, Yaniv is a person in British Columbia who is born biological male, has male genitalia, identifies as a woman, and approached at least 14 female estheticians, waxologists, and requested a Brazilian bikini wax, which is a waxing service for the genital area. And the women, many of them are East Indian, a lot of them are Sikh, but the women said, we don't want to wax male genitalia, we're declining the service. And Yaniv filed more than 14 human rights complaints against these women, subjected them to a lot of stress. Some of the businesses closed. He was demanding, in some cases, as much as $15,000 and said, pay me $15,000 and I'll go away and I'll withdraw the complaint. So he was using those tactics to extract money from these women. Finally, after a lot of ordeals, the BC Human Rights Tribunal heard 3 of the cases in July of 2019 and issued a decision in October of 2019 dismissing all of the complaints. And so Yaniv lost these complaints. But just recently, Yaniv has filed a new complaint, again, against a female esthetician, a beauty salon, and most of the people there most of the women working there are East Indians and Sikhs. And this time Yaniv is asking for a leg waxing rather than genital waxing. And the ladies have also refused that because they don't feel it's not as intimate, but it's still kind of an intimate service. And there are places where men can go to get their legs waxed, right? But Yaniv says, well, I identify as a woman, therefore I want to go to a female salon. And that is Yaniv's argument.
So does Yaniv have a legal leg to stand on in the leg waxing complaint?
It appears to be that Yaniv would have stronger grounds. However, this is still quite an intimate service. I mean, whoever's receiving it, you're usually stripped down to your underwear, or maybe you're not wearing anything at all. And when it gets to the upper part of the leg, it's just something women are not. A woman shouldn't have to provide that to a man, is basically our position under the Charter's freedom of association guarantee, as well as the security of the person. Women don't feel safe providing a service that is not super intimate, but quasi-intimate. And in our society, I mean, there's so many places to go to. This seems to be very much a political move to try to make a political statement, and we're going to bat for the women that Yaniv is complaining against.
So is there anything that can be done, John, to prevent individuals from continuously launching what appears to be frivolous human rights complaints, like you said, making a political statement, and therefore making life unnecessarily difficult for people trying to simply earn an honest living?
Well, in the long run, we need to change the legislation, right? Because right now, typically, the legislation is stacked in favor of complainants and against people, usually often businesses, against whom the complaint is filed, right? So the whole system is quite biased. They appoint the decision makers, the tribunal members are appointed on the basis of their beliefs and activism on the plaintiff's side of the equation. They're not promoted on the basis of their objectivity. So these are all problems. An interesting twist in the Yaniv case in BC is that the BC Human Rights Tribunal surprisingly did order Yaniv to pay $2,000 to each of the three women who were successful in defending against Yaniv's claim. And so far, Yaniv has not paid any of the $6,000. And so we're going to be raising this with the tribunal as well, that maybe Yaniv's latest complaint should be put on the back burner until the first $6,000 are paid.
The Supreme Court of British Columbia recently made a decision that is a little concerning with regard to elementary school children. John, the idea is to force kids against their wishes to participate in certain religious ceremonies. Do you have more details on that?
This case of Candace Servatius versus the School Board number 70, which is the Port Alberni School District on Vancouver Island. The situation there was that the school sent a letter home to parents, advising parents that there would be an Aboriginal smudging ceremony, which consists of burning sage and then waving the smoke from the burning sage over the children, for the purpose of, the school said, for the purpose of cleansing the spirits of the children of bad energy. And the mother did not take kindly to this, went to the school to ask for more information, and was told, "Oh, we're sorry, we've already subjected your kids to this." So the letter wasn't even sent out with ample notice. The problem here is it runs completely contrary to other court decisions which have said that we cannot say the Lord's Prayer in public schools because it is coercive and it's not good enough to simply provide some kids with an exemption from the Lord's Prayer because then they might feel that they're kind of pointed out or made to declare their disagreement with the Christian faith or whatever, right? So now we've come full circle. The court ruling said, well, this is not religious, it's just cultural.
But in fact, weren't there prayers that were part of this as well? How can it just be cultural then?
Well, there was also a school assembly, and there was a native elder, and there was a beating of drums, and there was a prayer said, and the prayer was said to a god of some kind. And if I think if there is a Christian pastor coming into the school and saying a Christian prayer, you'd likely see objections, and you would see the school very quickly apologizing. But there's got to be one standard. You can't say that we're going to allow some forms of spirituality in the schools, but not other forms. This is not tenable. So we are considering an appeal of the decision. Because the judge also ignored a lot of the facts, that the room was completely filled with smoke. The school said that the purpose was to cleanse the furniture of bad energy. The school even said that there had been a bullying incident in that classroom, and somebody had hurt themselves by bumping into the furniture. And so we needed this spiritual cleansing of the bad energy that was in the classroom. I mean, if that's not religious, I don't know what is.
So John, is this the new norm? Should parents just be expected to go with the flow? That students are now required to participate in what they consider religious ceremonies, which maybe run counter to their own religious beliefs?
Well, no, parents can and should object. Here, there are some nuances in the facts insofar as apparently the smoke was not waved individually over each child. So there is a slight distinction there. However, there's lots of smoke in the classroom, and the school had stated that it was for spiritual purposes. What parents should do, though, is ask and get the information and raise their objections and make it clear to teachers and principals. If parents are opposed to this because they don't want their child subjected to a religious ritual, parents have to speak up. It shouldn't have to end up in court. And I think when parents do speak up, in a lot of cases, the schools are going to take that into account, and at least in some cases, the schools are going to modify their behavior, right? But if parents are just silent and just suffer in silence and suck it up, put up with it, that's not a good approach.
And I remember what my parents used to say too, John: where there's smoke, there's fire. John Carpe, president of the Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, thanks a lot for joining me today from Calgary.
Glad to be with you, Hal.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless, and thanks so much for watching.